Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a returning very special guest, Curtis Yarvin, the man who you can read his writings at graymirror.substack.com. He invented the term the cathedral. He popularized the red pill and also glamping. He doesn't get enough credit for coining that term. Curtis was...
I love how you lie about me, Michael. It's like, it's such a brilliant, I think it's one of these Russian disinformation techniques, you tell to, I am glamorous, but actually I've never actually glamped. I had an opportunity to glamp the other night and I will stay in the Airbnb because I'm an old cell. But
you've never built a cathedral either, and here we are. So your equivocations are fooling no one. What I wanted to talk to you about is last week I had on Cernovich, and you are as good as him, if not better, at kind of reading between the lines of what we're being told in corporate media. You're very big on political analysis in terms of people's incentives and responding to incentives, as opposed to this is a good guy, this is a bad guy, and this kind of Star Wars cartoony version of what's going on. One of the things I'd asked you, and you'd given me a fairly good explanation, is what do you think it is that Putin wants with what's going on in the Ukraine situation? And if you had to guess, how does he think this is going to end?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I'm not sure it's entirely the place to, it's a fun place to start. I want to register an objection to the use of your term corporate media, because you're basically, when you say corporate media, and I hear that a lot, you're basically saying the problem with this media is that it's owned by evil corporations. And, so there's a sort of subtle left-wing critique in there. You're
Correct.
Like, wow.
That's by design.
That must mean no, because you're basically, there's a sort of falsity in there, because you know what ProPublica is?
No.
It's basically, it's the New York Times as a nonprofit. And so
Sure.
When you're basically saying corporate media, it's like attaching an antibody that is sort of attaching to something that is completely coincidental and false, and it's easily mutated away from. If you were founding the New York Times today, it would be a nonprofit. And so corporate media basically doesn't describe it. I usually say institutional media or legitimate media or something like that. I'll sort of save my slanted labels for when I really need them. All right, I'm just lecturing you there. If you'll absorb that lecture kind of quietly, and let me answer your question.
No, this is my show. Okay. I completely disagree with what you said. We're not going to get into it now, but I'm aware of that criticism and I disagree with it. But go ahead. So please answer my question, sir. I may remind you you're under oath.
What does Putin want? I think Putin, a couple of things. I think Putin is thinking sort of, Americans are kind of totally unfamiliar with something called international law, which existed before something else we call international law. There's something else we call international law, are like the bylaws of the 20th century American empire. The previous system of international law, which I usually call classical international law, if you want to learn about it, you can read, there's this motherfucker named Emmerich de Vattel, which sounds kind of like a rapper, but he was a Swiss diplomat. And he wrote a book simply called The Law of Nations, which is about the law of nations. And if you want, this was the sort of textbook in statesmanship that was used by our founders. It was standard in Europe. It's very, very brief and simple and condenses a lot of previous work. If you want to understand classical international law and you don't have time to listen to my sorry ass, go and read Vattel. That said, basically, that is sort of the world that sort of conditions what Putin is operating under, but it's sort of operating more from a memory of this. The basic principle of Vattel is that it's a multipolar order, and every nation is sovereign. Sovereigns are have to interact under solely a system of natural law, like men marooned on a desert island. Like some of them are strong, some of them are weak. What is the right? The question that many 18th century philosophers were, and previous, really, the law of nations goes back. The classical law of nations is very early, because Europe is a very multipolar place very early. What is the sort of the natural rules that pertain between them without having to come together and make up rules? That's sort of what is meant by natural law. So basically, is it the natural law that I can't just fucking kill you? Yeah, probably. And indeed, you're going to find that in basically all except the most perverse legal systems. So when you're basically looking at the natural law of nations, what you're seeing is what is the sort of law that pertains between these sovereigns. And these sovereigns basically have an unlimited right to judge every question for themselves. And they, nothing binds them in the old multipolar order. There's no power above them that binds them to obey. It's sort of almost a confusion of the word law. There is no like such thing as international law,
right,
as positive international law, really, in the Vatelian sense, right? So essentially the way that war is seen in classical international law is like a sort of armed lawsuit. Like, suppose you're a fucking asshole, which I can see by the face you are. Your face you are, and you have, yeah, and I love that gesture, man. And you have, you're a farmer. You're a fucking farmer. You're one of these like Jewish, yeah, exactly. Like, imagine a farming Jew, right? Like it must have happened at some point.
Judah Benjamin.
He was a lawyer. Did he farm too?
I'm assuming he had a plantation. He had to have.
I'm sure there was some Irishman who like did all the dirty work for him. And in any case, no, he wouldn't. Judah Benjamin wrote this great man. I mean, but he wouldn't dirty his hands and things like that. But anyway, so if you think of a war in the sense of classical international law, it's like a lawsuit. It's like a tort. So you're a farmer next to me, and like you moved your fence.
Wait, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. I think we just unlocked a key of the Torah, which was when Moses and our people were in the desert 40 years. God's like, look, we know they're not going to have agriculture. We're just going to send them food from heaven because that's the best we could do to keep these people fed.
That's right. That's right. It was sort of a kind of an early kind of DoorDash, basically. Yeah. And with only one thing on the menu, and I'll bet Lana was like fucking disgusting. I bet it's like the neutral loaf you get in prison. But in any case, where was I? Neutral loaf. So when you have a war under classical international law, it's basically saying it's like a tort. It's like a lawsuit. It's like you fucked me, and basically the only way that I can respond is to claim my rights by force. So when Frederick the Great invades Silesia, basically, he invades Silesia because he wants fucking Silesia. But he comes up with this sort of explanation and why under certain ducal inheritance, like there's this huge medieval book of like, because this duke fucked this other duke, it belongs to him, and it doesn't belong to Marie Theresa because she's a woman, and blah blah blah, right? So he comes up with this explanation of why it is justified for him to invade Silesia. In fact, of course, he wants its rich iron and coal mines and shit, and like he's like, I can just like take this shit from Marie Theresa, right? It turns out to be a little harder than he thinks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, that's like, I'm prosecuting a lawsuit, but there's no sort of court which I can prosecute the lawsuit before and that will enforce the judgment. I have to enforce the motherfucking judgment myself on this bitch Marie Theresa, right? And that's sort of like, so it's sort of a lawsuit, a kind of a system in which the lawsuit is sort of a combat of arms. And in this combat of arms, the richest and strongest tend to win, which is exactly the way it works in a fucking court, except it would make much better TV, right? Yeah. So basically, and we'll get to. I just posted a long thing. We'll get to my issue with some of the war footage coming out of Ukraine. I hope the Ukraine. What?
I caught that. Go ahead.
I try to be consistent, and the I don't let anyway. Well, that's the language issue is another discussion, but this whole fucking thing is like this tragic comedy of unbelievable proportions. Yes. That's my overall analysis of the war in the Ukraine. It's a yeah. Anyway, so basically, for example, in this lawsuit, Louis in this sort of concept, Louis XIV, very very influential absolute monarch. They called him the Sun King. Right. He reigned for 50 years. Incredible badass. I mean, there's and his canon are emblazoned with the Latin phrase "ultima ratio regum," which means the last argument of kings. So basically, in terms of the lawsuit here, like how is how is the West behaving in a way that is sort of illegitimate and justifies basically suing? Why is Putin ready to sue the Ukraine, or sometimes I just say Kiev regime, and like you can just use the cities as metonyms. You can say there's a civil war in Russia between Moscow and Kiev, right? The regime in Moscow, the regime in Kiev, they're both obviously regimes. Everything is a regime, and it's not pejorative. It's objective. Anyway, so basically, so you say, first of all, what are the grounds of this lawsuit? The grounds of this lawsuit are, number one, the detachment of the Ukraine from the Soviet Union, including, one of the three old and great Russian cities, Kiev, Petersburg, Moscow, was basically this sort of act of quasi-banditry in the fall of the Soviet Union. The eastern bank of the Ukraine has basically been, part of Russia since, Pocahontas was a little girl, right? Then there's another part that was basically part of Poland and also Austria-Hungary. That part has been, but the cities were all basically ethnically cleansed. There were Jews, there were all kinds of people in the cities. The cities speak Russian, and there's this sort of strange peasant language, which used to be called Ruthenian and is now called Hungarian, Ukrainian, which is a kind of a distant relative of Russian. It's like French versus Spanish. And, the importance in the life of the Ukraine, say, like of Ukrainian, it's like the importance of like French in Canada or something like that. Like there's definitely a bunch of, Hicks planting radishes out of the country who speak it. Generally, they also speak Russian. And basically all of the attempts to promote this other language have been like the lingua franca of the Ukraine is Russian. And all of the attempts to sort of promote this other language have been sort of transparently motivated by generally diabolical political goals. So the Germans are the first to create the state of Ukraine. It comes out of this in 1917, not the Nazis. It comes out of sort of, how the like mid 19th century, like romantic nationalism, Poles sing songs about Poland. Actually, most people don't know this, but the Ukraine has a national anthem. And the national anthem, the first line of the national anthem can be translated in a number of ways, but one of the more common translations is Ukraine isn't dead yet.
Oh.
Which that's just such a great Eastern European move, right? So the thing is, here you have this.
Is that it's almost like don't call it a comeback? I've been here.
Yeah, you don't call it a comeback, right?
Hey guys, do you suffer from poor quality sleep, or when you work in your computer all day, you get like eye sores and headaches? Well, that's what BlueBlock's blue light glasses can help you with. They've got a bunch of different types of glasses for different issues. For example, they've got the blue light computer glasses for headaches, sore eyes, digital eye strain. They've got the Sleep Plus blue light blocking glasses when you have poor sleep or fatigue. Insomnia is the worst, and I'm so glad I don't have it. If you suffer from it, maybe this can help you out. The good thing about BlueBlocks is it's made in optics laboratories in Australia. It's not mass produced in factories in Asia. They've got these stylish frames. You've got a bunch to choose from. You could see them in GQ. This technology is backed by science, which is tested to ensure they work, unlike other blue light glasses companies. They're more expensive than other brands, but they're worth the extra investments because you're paying for peace of mind and your health instead of some gimmicky crap. They come in non-prescription, prescription, and reading options. They've got glasses for every need. BlueBlocks also has amazing other products such as low blue light bulbs, red light therapy devices, and 100% blackout sleep masks, all backed by science. They ship worldwide in rapid time, and you got easy returns and exchanges. All you got to do is go to blueblocks.com/you're welcome. That's BLUBLOX.com/you're welcome, and use coupon code welcome to save 15% off and get some peace of mind. That's blueblocks.com, BLUBLOX.com/you're welcome. Use coupon code welcome to save 15% off. Your Welcome is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you get a great rate on car insurance, even if it's not with them. They have this nifty comparison tool that puts rates side by side, so you choose a rate and coverages that work for you. So let's say you're interested in lowering your rate on car insurance. You visit progressive.com to get a quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and easy to compare. so that all you have to do is choose the rate and coverages you like. Progressive gives you options so you can make the best choice for you. You could be looking forward to saving money in the very near future. More money for, say, pair of noise-canceling headphones, an Instapot, more puzzles, whatever brings you joy. Get a quote today at progressive.com. It's one small step you could do today that can make a big impact on your budget tomorrow. Progressive Casualty Insurance and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Let's get back to the show.
And the I mean, my Substack is certainly not come back, right? You know, and the so you're basically looking at this sort of very marginal thing constructed out of like sort of this linguistic residue of like the ninth century that isn't found basically only in areas, you know, involving a lot of hay, that has been created basically a couple of times in recent history as a country, which had never existed before, basically always in something like an act of war against Russia. And so basically it's not quite like Texas, because Texas doesn't have a big linguistic minority. Well, as Mexicans, I guess, you know, and it's actually a little bit like basically you split off Texas into its own independent country, and the official language of Texas becomes Mexican, I mean Spanish. And the like, you know, then there's all this like Texas nationalism that sort of merged with like Mexican nationalism in a way. And the whole thing is basically, you know, run by a couple of guys out of China, right? You know, and that's sort of what you're looking at. So sort of the existence of this separate state, it's like Alsace-Lorraine, you know, for Germany or for France, depending on who has it. Actually, they all speak German there, you know, and so it's like this, you know, first of all, you're looking, let's go back to the lawsuit frame. You're looking at, you have this fucking car you stole from me like 30 years ago. Okay, you didn't steal it from me. You basically came to my door and were very belligerent and bought it for like a 20th of its actual price, right? But like, you know, I've always felt that this transaction is fundamentally illegitimate, and that the Ukraine is part of Russia, and what the fuck, okay? Because it was not like, nobody treated it as, you know, in the Soviet Union, it's like, you know, going between Kiev and Moscow is like going between like, you know, Tennessee and Kentucky. I mean, you know, right? And there aren't even like different laws. There's like, it's part of this, it's a line on a map. And so then you have, okay, not only does this exist, but basically there are enormous amounts of basically 2-3 things coming from the West in this state. There is enormous amounts of political influence, as you can see from the leaked Victoria Nuland call. The State Department is basically picking Ukraine's new government. I'm sorry, you know, the Kiev regime's new you know, political officers, and certainly picking the leaders of, you know, setting up opposing coalitions, doing stuff that's basically like, if that was being done by a force within the country, that force would clearly be one of the most powerful forces in the country, right? Number two, you're basically arming the smaller country with weapons that are clearly superior to the weapons of Russia. In fact, the way Putin describes it is you're essentially trying to create an anti-Russia on Russia's doorstep. So imagine basically it's like the Chinese are arming the Canadians, right? And they're putting like hypersonic nuclear weapons, you know, that can like blow up, you know, Biden in like 45 seconds, you know, and they're mounting them in Toronto. Right, you know, and you know, it's the future that China has more people, it has more money, it's like in every way more powerful than us, and they're thought to covet California, right? You know, and you know, because we owe them all this money, right? So it's a charged and dangerous relationship. The U.S. is very much on the back foot, and here is a sense that Canada is kind of being armed as an anti-America. Canada, by the way, is governed in the Chinese fashion. You know, the streets are immaculate. You know, heroin is published by like burning at the stake, right? So, you know, totally different Canada, and you know, this Canada is starting to boom. They have, you know, there's a lot of Chinese investment coming in. They have, you know, factories with whatever, right? So as America in this situation, you're very much on the back foot, and you feel that this is very much sort of an attack, and so you develop it because it's hostile to you. You become hostile to it, and then it's like, look. Why do we need all these arms? We need all these arms to defend ourselves against the US Army, which is massing provocatively on our borders, right? And so there's this the thing that is being done with Ukraine, and this under natural law, basically, if like somebody is like sharpening his like stone axe on this island, he's like sharpening his stone axe every night, and he's like murmuring your name. He's like, get that mouse fucker, and a mouse fucker, and only one of us is gonna live. It's like, yeah, do you have to wait for him to come over to like your fucking straw mat and have him bash your head in with a stone axe? Or are you justified in doing that first? You were totally justified in doing that first. And so, once sort of things degenerate to the level of like war, of like combat, like, yeah, you have to act. One of the ridiculous, stupid things about this like 5-year-old 20th century view of law is this concept of like the aggressor. The concept of aggression does not exist in classical international law. It's basically sort of made up to justify this kind of typical Anglo-American method of smashing weaker powers, which I call, kick the dog until it bites, and then call it a mad dog and shoot it, right? And so basically, Putin, this is what's going on here. Putin is being constantly kicked, and and Russia is being constantly kicked. And there's this great Twitter thread of like, American great international relations gods, from like George Kennan, John Mearsheimer, Henry Kissinger, 3 ambassadors to Russia, 2 secretaries of defense, all quoted as saying, it is insane to provoke Putin by expanding NATO in his direction. There's absolutely nothing that you're getting at it, and they regard this as an existential threat. It's like, suddenly Texas, you have this independent Texas, and it joins the Warsaw Pact.
Right, okay.
The fucking Warsaw Pact. And it's like, basically, don't mess with Texas, or like Russia is going to nuke you, right? And like that's a very threatening and unpleasant situation, and there's no cause for them to do that. There's nothing other than sort of some kind of predatory motive it's just bad behavior. You don't set out, you don't set up man traps outside your friend's house, right? That again is a violation of natural law. And so basically Putin is acting on this basis. And, whereas America is acting on the basis of basically mid 20th century international law, which is that basically any dog that bites is a mad dog, and it probably is going to eat not only you, also your family. So it's just bite you, it's going to kill you. It's not just going to kill you, it's going to eat you. And it's probably going to eat all of your family as well. Dogs are carnivores, and possibly the whole community, right? And so I had this conversation with a very, very serious and intelligent person, leader in a scientific field. And he's basically like, look, if you let Putin take the Ukraine, actually, I think he said Ukraine. If you let Putin take Ukraine, and he will, where will he stop? I'm like, well, I don't know. I guess I'd mainly be concerned that he stops at the Channel. I think if he takes England, that's going too far, right? And I think I would make a stand there, and but really it's the other hemisphere which he's going to do, and my friend is actually, well, okay, once he takes England, then maybe he takes the Falkland Islands. Okay, that's our, and then like you're imagining these like T-72s.
The Falkland Islands belong to Britain.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But if you take Britain out of the Falklands, then you have this possession in the Western Hemisphere. Right, and then from that point, you take Buenos Aires, long time, you take Argentina, and then, you're basically like, Spetsnaz, they're like marching through the jungle, they get to Brazil, they have to work with these peoples of the Amazon, find tubas, hunt monkeys, eventually they wind up in one of these caravans at the Rio Grande, right, and except that instead of a caravan, this is an armored Russian spearhead with MLRS vehicles. It's been portaged over the Darien Gap by natives or something. And, suddenly like rockets are raining down on El Paso, right? And you're just like, okay, it's just El Paso. But soon they're fanning out across the Midwest, right? And this was the fear of my friend. And it's like, I'm amazed, right? And this is an amazing way to think. Moreover, once you realize that Putin is basically simply LARPing as a Russian 18th or 19th or 17th or 16th century statesman, and not in fact, like, I think he has I think he's probably never thought at all about the Falkland Islands. I don't, think he has any plan to march through the Brazilian jungle. He could go over the North Pole, and that way you would have to contend with the bears, right?
Yeah.
He's worked with bears. The Russians are very strong with bears.
Yes,
it would be
sir.
like Hannibal crossing the Alps, but like Putin crossing the North Pole
With
but
polar
with bears.
Yeah.
With bears, right? But I mean, the thing is, if you're into these kinds of lurid fantasies, there's a lot of places you can go. But if you're not, this is completely fucking crazy, right? And so from his perspective, obviously he's going to interpret the Western world as not crazy but evil, and there's a certain sort of truth in that. So he's basically like, they are just going to squeeze me and squeeze me and squeeze me until I choke. That said, Putin did miscalculate here, I think, in two ways. The first way is that he totally he overestimated the strength of his army, which has only previously been used against like Georgians. Okay, and like it's the old world, but it's still in a way like the third world. Like, no offense to any Georgians reading, but I think they still have like knights in armor and castles and stuff, right? So very old romantic tradition, excellent wine, amazing barbecue. I don't really put them up with like Chechens, right? I think the Chechens used to just raid them and just take their woman and then just give them back when they were done. I think that's how it was with the Georgians. So, basically that was straightforward. I'm sorry if there are any Georgian viewers who I've offended there, but like, that's just my very biased impression that Russians versus Georgians is not a problem. And I think this guy Saakashvili, who was the president of Georgia, which was a big thing. I think he and Zelensky, I think he's like lives in America and like drives an Uber or something. So maybe Zelensky could come here and like drive a Lyft, and they could have like a reality show or something, But in any case, Putin's mistakes. So the Russian army military was clearly not as competent as he thought. The Ukrainian military was clearly stronger than he thought. Like, it's still just a sort of mass, and also the Ukrainian military has all of this detailed assistance from NATO. They're targeting, they're using satellites, they're basically doing the whole information part of the war, and only these poor fuckers down in Ukraine are having to actually go down and die. So it's actually like there's a way in which this is like America fighting the war, and it's kind of their favorite kind of war because it involves no risk.
I'm Dave Detman, also known as Dr. Gadget. I've got a new podcast called The Big Idea, and every week I talk to inventors and visionaries who made it big in their respective industries. We'll tackle weekly trending tech, provide inside tips for your success, and go deep dives on the latest and greatest innovations. And I know you're going to love this part. I'll also have plenty of free giveaways. Who doesn't love free stuff? So listen to and follow The Big Idea with me, Dr. Gadget, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast One, and wherever you get your podcasts.
My fellow Americans, if you have an IRA, 401k, or savings account, things are getting scary out there. The government has already printed more money in the past 2 years than the previous 100 years combined. The national debt just hit a record $30 trillion, and inflation is the highest we've seen since 1982. It's only a matter of time before we have to pay the piper. If you have $50,000 or more in retirement savings, your money could be at risk. Call my friends at Goldco to see how you could protect your retirement with gold and silver before it's too late. Call 866-443-1876 or go to malicelikesgold.com. They'll give you up to $10,000 in free silver when you open an account. That's malicelikesgold.com. Let's get back to the show.
So, DoD and state is having a lot of fun with this. The cathedral's having a lot of fun with it. And the, audience out there is having a lot of fun with it too. And like, that is not something that he anticipated. He also anticipated it resolving at a diplomatic level, like the war with Georgia. He was expecting some consequences, some shit, some whatever. People are like, okay, part of the fucking Soviet Union. Like, do we really care about Georgia? What is it, like knights and like castles and like, internet scams, right? That's how a lot of these places, are sort of based on that business model. And so you're like looking, at this, and you're like, okay, I'm going to restore sort of a major part of Russia. I'm going to get rid of this armed threat while I still can. I am, totally in the right based on the sort of weird attack that they're setting up with this Ukraine thing, which they obviously have no good reason to give a shit about. And and I can do it, and it makes sense to do it. And what he didn't anticipate is that basically he would become like the Derek Chauvin of Central Europe. Right. So, basically he's like, suddenly he's in that, you've probably seen the Photoshops, like he's kneeling on Ukraine's neck and he's like, but this is an approved shoulder restraint, right? And Ukraine is like, I can't breathe. And the whole world is like covering their Twitter profiles with Ukrainian flags. And they're really just frankly masturbating, over like this thing. There's a great report, the Pandora Papers.
No.
Well, one of the great things, forgetting the whole Burisma Biden thing, one of the great things the Pandora Papers found was they actually found, are you ready for this? Zelensky, the president of the Kiev regime, how many Y's does he have in his name? It's never clear. I've seen 2. I don't think I've seen 3. Zelensky, you've written Ukrainian. It's just very, very funny. In any case, they found his foreign bank accounts.
Oh.
So, our like Jon Stewart of he and his like KGB head basically are in, it's just classic Russian oligarch stuff, like owning a bunch of, awesome property in London, this is the standard way you manage your money, in this, but it's like basically then the standard way you manage your money is to manage it like a fucking crook, and so needless to say, how much reporting, you can find this, it's like not a secret, how much reporting has been done on it? 0.
Yeah.
Right. So, basically like the whole thing is in the tank. And when you read news from this whole thing, you're just like, that anything like that has been filtered out. Right. This is why I really want to see this guy driving a Lyft or maybe an Uber in New York, or like, I don't know, cabs. Do they sell cabs in New York?
They have cabs.
They have cabs. Okay. He could probably do well at that. So Putin is basically like, holy shit, I have this like complete breach with the West on my hands. And I'm like, I've triggered this like social media cascade.
Yeah.
And like Apple is like, if you turn on your iPhone in Russia, it will just like display like an Easter egg, like fuck you, Putin, and just like that's not true, but it probably could be made true. And like just like this whole 30-year project of like, we're gonna westernize Russia is just like, it's like the city falling down at the end of Inception. Like everywhere you look, it's fucking blowing up. Right. And he had no anticipation of that. He doesn't, Russia has sort of never understood the West that well in my lifetime, unlike China, which sort of clings to like 70s propaganda themes, like human rights for Black people as their like criticisms of America, which is frankly pretty dated. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it reminds me of the 1930s and or at least the 1960s, and like very, very dated. And Russia has started to do a little more like based trolling of the US, but they still, like you recall their like retarded 2016 memes, right? They still don't really understand, like they just mispredicted this. And now they're in a situation where they're basically like, have this much more abrupt choice than they realized, which is to basically to submit or to really fight back. And really fight back suddenly turns out to mean basically across the sort of whole spectrum of sovereignty, because of course, any leader of the USSR, looking at how the Russian Federation has been run for the last 30 years, would be like, yeah, you've given up quite a bit of your sovereignty already. You have a lot of external dependencies. So Putin has fought fairly hard to like, he's running a trade surplus. That's huge. On the other hand, he was such a fucking idiot that he was like, I have strategic, foreign reserves. Well, no, you have an account at the Fed. Like your reserves are like, never invest in it. That's an investment. Never invest in something that will be illiquid at the point when you need it most.
Yeah.
Kids, you will make that mistake. Someone listening to the podcast right now will make that mistake. He will be like Putin. Kids, don't be like Putin, right? And so he must be like looking at this and he's like, I could have fucking taken it out in cash. I could have loaded like the Antonov, 225 with like dollars and euros and like flown it to Moscow and requested like unmarked fucking bills. Do you want to pay or do you not want to pay? I want unmarked fucking bills. I don't want you to know what bills I have. And like, I'm going to have a huge pile of cash and you're going to have a hard time keeping me from spending those bills, right? Because they are not counterfeit. and so the like, he basically was sort of counting on continuing to be part of the West. There was sort of no sense in which he's like, oh my God, we got to replace this. We got to replace that. We got to not depend on the West for anything. Right. And suddenly he's in a position where he's like, why don't I look in the other direction? What about my friends in China? And are they friends in China? And his friends in China are just like, man, did you have to fucking do this? Like, right. why are you rocking the fucking boat like this? Like, there's nothing worse than rocking the fucking boat. Like, we grew up in the Cultural Revolution. Don't rock the fucking boat. How are you not aware of this? How did you not know that this was happening? We're kind of a little pissed. Because actually we're in this basically great position where we're just like sucking all the blood out of the, economic blood out of the West. And there are like 3 things that we can't do. And like, we can't build like jetliners. We can't really build semiconductor process tech, and the fabs we have are not the best. So we've got to, for our high-end chips and things, we've got to import things. Other than that, however, we're basically set. And, still there's a reliance on kind of global economy integration. There's no, I don't know how hard they've worked to like prevent their like resource supply from being cut off. But like the West's dependence on China is so enormous that you're like basically like the really important question, sort of geopolitical question here is, does China actually make any kind of effort to enforce the sanctions against Russia? Or is there basically just a continuing flow of trade and in raw and manufactured goods and dollars or renminbi or whatever between China and Russia? Can, for example, imagine China says to Russia, okay, hey, you've got these frozen reserves. Okay, that's like a frozen account, that's still an IOU. They're acknowledging that you own this shit, but they're just like, we can't pay you right now. So, one thing you can do with an IOU like that, in theory, and I'm sure in practice at this level, is sell it. So you basically say, hey, China's like, okay, for your like frozen dollars, we will give you 70 cents on the dollar in renminbi.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to go shopping? Alibaba's right over there. We're a huge fucking shopping mall. You could buy anything. Right. And so what is the West going to do? Like, we're not going to buy Chinese goods because you're selling shit to Russia. And so you're basically getting, this is like the Dragon Bear alliance. You're creating something that's kind of pretty fucking self-sufficient in natural resources. It's pretty fucking self-sufficient, if you'll excuse my fucking French. It's pretty self-sufficient in, it's completely self-sufficient in manufacturing, except for these few very, very high-end things. As far as the weaknesses with respect to the West, the only weakness it has with respect to the West is basically Elon Musk's Starship actually works, at which place the West will have like 100x more heavy lift capacity and should use that to like defeat Eurasia in space war, right? That's what the Space Force is for, dude. But other than that, basically Putin is in the situation where if China will actually work with him, they can actually create much more sovereignty than either of these countries has right now. And that involves like, a financial, that involves you start to see this world in which China can just be like, hey, America, we suck all the juice out of you. We're done here. You're Argentina. You have like, crops and like rocks and like people selling shit to each other and like people fucking around and getting green pieces of paper. That's what you have. So if we don't want your green pieces of paper anymore, I don't know, learn to do something, and like, it's actually, everyone, as everyone points out, like 100 years ago or 1900, Argentina is like a richer country than the US. And so you're basically like, imagine America, but basically the only source of manufactured goods is to buy imports with revenue from selling crops.
Right.
Yeah, right. That's like a pretty crumbling fucking America, right? and because actually even revving up those supply chains again and like building factories and shit. Well, where's your environmental impact statement? Well, you haven't done the report. Like you can't build anything, right? And so it's actually there's a very clear strategy, by which these countries sort of stick to their guns long enough that they can actually just like cut off this threat to them, which is now also dependent on them, and be like, boop, and it'll be interesting to see what Russia does with the gas, for example, because it's like, okay, we're going to send you gas and you're going to send us dollars and euros that like we can't buy anything in, and like what, like this is really weird, man. And why don't we just not send you the gas and we feed how you feel? Maybe you can set up like a cam or something so we can watch you like freeze in your unheated house, like one of those Russian dash cams, but you have like cams of like Germans freezing to death like all over Berlin, right? And then you're
I love that we still have Fume as a sponsor. Quitting smoking is the best thing you could do for your health, and Fume can help you get there. Fume is a natural inhaler designed for a better, safer, and natural way to quit cigarettes. No smoke, no vape, no nicotine replacement. What it replaces is that hand-to-mouth habit of smoking, which is that ritual, which is so hard for so many people to break. Fume is made of 100% Canadian maple. They have these cores infused with plant oils that are studied to curb cravings. They have flavors like peppermint. Conquer has minty notes to stimulate menthol cigarettes. Lemon Berry Bliss for sweet experience. Their flavors are all 100% natural, no chemicals, no flavors, and absolutely no nicotine. Guys, smoking's expensive. At the very least, you're going to be saving yourself a lot of money. Quitting is tough, but Fume can really help. And they've got thousands of 5-star reviews from smokers who tried everything else, and this works. Whether you're a smoker or an ex-smoker who still struggles with cravings, Fume is the perfect tool for you. It's time to create positive habits and quit naturally Fume. And I'm glad to be a part of helping to make it easier. You're going to save on cigarettes you aren't buying. You're not going to have to buy breath mints. Your teeth won't be as yellow when you save on your initial purchase of Fume. If you head to breathefume.com/malice, BREATHEFUM.com/malice, use promo code malice, you get 10% off your order. That's 10% off your entire order when you head to BREATHEFUM.com/malice and use code malice. Guys, I love Crowd Health and working with them because if you're uninsured right now, I get it. Even with insurance, healthcare costs are out of control. Nothing is stopping insurance companies and hospitals from continuing to raise their prices, and there's enormous incentive for them to do so. But thanks to Crowd Health, you don't have to choose between rolling the dice or paying through the nose for some peace of mind. Crowd Health isn't health insurance, and that's how it works. Because with insurance, you pay huge premiums, but you get huge deductibles, which means on top of the thousands you pay to keep your plan, you're paying thousands more before insurance kicks in 1 penny. 1 in 6 claims are denied by healthcare.gov plans, which is why so many people take their chance without insurance. Crowd Health gives you a new way to pay for healthcare because there's no doctor networks, there's no huge premiums or no high deductibles, and there's no surprises. So Crowd Health puts community back in community healthcare and gives its members access to high quality care for up to 60% less in the process. You pay one low monthly total, you fund your account, and you get access to the Crowd Health community, which is less than $200 a month for most people. 100% of your contribution directly funds and reduces the healthcare cost of the community. How do they lower your costs? They make payment to doctors and members as quickly as possible, and they negotiate on the community's behalf when unexpected bills arise, which totally reverses the vicious incentives that got the healthcare system into this mess in the first place. Are you ready for a better way to pay for healthcare? Join the crowd. Right now, you can get your first 6 months for just $99 a month. That's almost 50% off normal price at a lot less than a high deductible healthcare plan. Just go to joincrowdhealth.com and use promo code WELCOME and sign up. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code WELCOME. Crowd Health is not health insurance. It's a totally different way of paying for healthcare. Terms and conditions may apply. Let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, so that this is actually, you have this sort of primitive superstate of China and Russia, which is actually in a condition to kind of thrive to a certain extent without the West. And again, like the chip, manufacturing thing is a significant issue, but then again, they do have a lot of engineers in China, they study calculus. If you know the works of Wei-Hun Wang, a lot of calculus there. And I think they can probably build chips. So Russia, for example, here's a concrete example of this problem. Russia suddenly can't get, bought all these American and European planes. What were you thinking? You were thinking you'd be integrated into the global economy. Guess what? Now these motherfuckers won't sell you any spare parts. What is a plane without spare parts? It's a hunk of fucking junk. Guess who's working really hard on building and scaling up their planes? China. They build regional jets. Okay, maybe you got to take an extra hop, but suddenly you're starting to get a sense of like, okay, this thing can kind of be independent. Suddenly the Russians are like, okay, we're going to pirate your software. Welcome to this pirate haven. Okay, do you allow packets to flow back and forth to Russia? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Suddenly you're like, okay, now we're partitioning the fucking internet. You're actually not that far. Ukraine sent a petition to ICANN being like, we should partition the internet against these Russian, and so you're basically looking at this sort of iron curtain forming in a way that's almost like bottom up. It's like a bottom up iron curtain. Like the whole thing is just kind of ripping apart, like a seam being pulled apart. And it's just like, it was pop, 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 pop. All of these little ties between people that are across this thing split. Your ties to basically Western ties to Ukraine split as they're overrun by Putin's stormtroopers. And have you noticed the Z symbol? The Z symbol. Of course. It's amazing. Did you see the thing with the gymnast who put the Z on? Yeah, and he was like deported to Winnipeg or something like instantly, right? He should have that was amazing. But like Z, one of the funny things is the movie Z.
I don't think I do. What, you mean Zorro?
Sorry?
You mean Zorro?
No. Z by what's his face? The great Greek director. He did State of Siege. He did do Battle of Algiers, but it's kind of the same genre. Anyway, it's this movie about the sort of popular, of course, shit-lib uprising against the Greek dictators, right? And so the Greek dictatorship makes sort of cleans up Greece and then makes this mistake of kind of like relaxing its hand a little bit, and then there's of course people power, color revolution, whatever. Really good movie, and but the symbol of the resistance is Z.
Okay.
And they're like painting Z's everywhere. It means something totally different. They're painting Z's everywhere. It's so easy to make a Z. And I think it's a great symbol. It sort of doesn't have any like mid-20th century baggage, but it's really easy to draw. And like who's gonna, I don't know. I'm not suggesting anyone vandalize anything, of course. Anyway, so yeah, that's basically Putin's situation, is that he's like, okay, they're building this anti-Ukraine, this anti-Russia in the Ukraine, right? And then he's like, okay, I'm gonna teach them a lesson that this won't be tolerated. And then suddenly he's in the position where he's like the devil of the whole Anglo-American world. And they're basically, calling for him to be just destroyed. And he's actually at war in a way, like suddenly one of the problems with basically sort of Russian diplomacy toward the US is that because its sort of DNA is from the Soviet period, they make this really unwarranted assumption that there are a lot of Russian sympathizers everywhere in the deep state. And, of course, so basically the Soviet Union is always basically doing these incredibly, going back to the tort framework, these incredibly mean things to the US. When you probably didn't know that when American planes after bombing Japan landed in the Soviet Union, rather than handing back the aviators to the US, they actually imprisoned them.
Oh, I didn't. Wow. Holy crap. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And and so basically there were these constant FUs from Lenin and Stalin to people like Wilson and FDR, where FDR would be like, I love you, and Lenin would be like, you bastard, I'm never fucking you again, and then go and take more money from him or something, right? It was this really dysfunctional relationship in which Lenin is basically the hot girl, and because power, right? And so they're used to having these deep American connections that can sort of look out for them and basically sort of cushion the blow if they basically deliver this just like massively flip the bird to America, and then of course this doesn't exist anymore. It's sort of the opposite, right? Putin is already on the verge of being, it's a fun thing to do, actually. Readers, like, try this, report back to Michael. He'll cover your legal expenses if it poses a problem. Just go to a Starbucks, order a venti latte and give your name as Putin. It's thought experiment, social. Yeah, I mean, and just like, yeah, it's fascinating. Michael, you should try this yourself. I'm sort of working up the nerve to do it, but I'm just old and recognizable. You should be an anonymous, person. In any case, that's the situation of Putin. He's basically in a war that's like as deep as like the Cold War in like 1963 or something. And he's just like, holy shit, are we going to have a Cuban Missile Crisis? Right? I don't think there's going to be nuclear war. Like, a friend of mine is like, are you like moving away from population centers? I'm like, no, I'm going to stay in population centers but I don't, like, that is a world that he didn't expect to be in. He has many sort of reflexes and plans for the sort of other world in which you kind of keep doing business as usual after some kind of ritual complaints. But now he's just like really pissed the system off. And, he's done this amazing, he's basically cured COVID. Had you noticed that Putin cured COVID?
I tweeted that.
You what?
I tweeted
that. I
didn't
get it from your tweet. I don't read your tweets. I don't read any tweets, right?
Smart
I'm
man.
not on Twitter, but
That's to your credit.
Like, Putin cured COVID. He didn't cure the disease. Omicron did that, but he cured the hysteria. And suddenly nobody cares about, it's so amazing how these stories basically take effect and like run the country in a way. Isn't it mind-boggling? And it's like there's something, something in control there that isn't even human, and you're just watching this like story sort of that is like taken animate form, like sweep over you. And like people just fall, like a story like the COVID story, climate change is another great one. They fall into people's hearts and they become what Gaetano Mosca called the political formula. They're basically explain like why I should use power in this way. And now people are like, I must do everything for like the Ukraine. Meanwhile, the fucking Ukrainians are the victims here because they've sort of been egged into a war they can't possibly win. They're out there basically being like, oh, we're going to be heroes, right? We have the whole world behind us. Well, and the idea that they have the whole world behind them but actually these just like frivolous assholes on Twitter, it's like completely skin deep. You can have the whole world behind you and still just lose.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that. And there's no reason to suppose that they would understand that. And it's not their job to understand that. If you're basically like, I think that, some people have said that I'm infantilizing the Ukrainians, the Kiev regime, but it's basically like, when I look at the relationship, and this is sort of soft power in general, when I look at the relationship between the US and like the liberal Kiev elites, there's one word that comes to mind. It starts with G. It isn't clamping. It's grooming. Okay, what we're looking at here is grooming. And so basically people are sending me mail, and they're literally, but Ukraine consents to this war. I'm like, I don't think we're looking at a situation where that consent is limited. And if you basically like your 8-year-old comes to you and he's like, I was walking down the street and I met this man named and I consented. I don't think you're going to be like, yes, he consented. I think that you're going to like find a police car and go and search for right, and like you will not accept him as your son's lover. And basically, like, I don't think that is a legitimate that argument of consent is completely illegitimate in a situation where you have power. What is soft power other than power? This is not a relationship of equals. Consent cannot be given in this situation. Right. And so basically, and we're putting Ukraine in this situation where they're like, one of the things I write in my posts is I'm like, okay, if you wanted to, suppose Americans hated Ukraine. Suppose they really wanted to punish these Ukrainian fuckers. They wanted to do as much damage to them as possible in any possible way, just out of some like old ethnic grudge. Right. So basically what you'd want to see, what would really be very, very satisfying in that situation is to like see them lose a bloody urban war. That would be great. Okay, if you really want to hurt them, basically, I think we're on, schedule for that. Then there was this amazing article in the Washington Post, this is no secret. Of course, everyone who can like do the math and has a brain and can basically look at this thing, will see that Ukraine is going to lose the conventional war. Not to worry. After all, the motto of the special forces is de oppressor, liber, to liberate the oppressed. The Ukrainians will then be oppressed. We will go and liberate them in this way, and we will train the moderate Ukrainians, or maybe even the radical Ukrainians, or the moderate Nazis. That's it. We're going to arm the moderate Nazis. I've actually basically seen this line of like arm the moderate Nazis, and like it's so great. I mean, what a precedent, right? And we're going to arm the moderate Nazis, or the moderate moderates. We're going to arm any Ukrainian over the age of 8, or at least 6. And we're going to send them to battle against Putin's minions. Will they die heroically? Of course they will, And so everything in DC is setting up for this incredible insurgency supporting mission. All the people that lost their jobs, or lost their work out of Afghanistan are looking for something to do. And they're like, okay, what the Taliban won in Afghanistan, but what if we were on the other side of the war? What if we were the ones supporting the Taliban? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be fun? Look at how many lessons would be learned. Of course, it's a fucking joke. And, there were all these attempts to create insurgencies in the Soviet Union after World War II. They all failed like utterly miserably.
Hello, guys. Michael Malice here, underwear model to the stars. If you want to get inside my pants, you want to wear Sheath underwear. And the great thing about Sheath underwear, I just collabed with them to make and design my own pair. And they're inspired by dynamite, just like the cover of the Anarchist Handbook. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, MALICE, you get 20% off. What's great about Sheath, and I wear them every day, is they've got this dual pouch technology, because there's one pouch for one part of your male anatomy, another pouch for another part of your male anatomy. First time you try them on, you're getting all your hands in there. You're like, this is weird. And from then on, you're like, oh, this is the most comfortable underwear I will ever wear. It's got added comfort, added performance, added mobility. And there's something a little subversive about talking to someone while the whole time your underwear is cupping your junk. I'm not going to lie. I do enjoy that aspect of it. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, you get 20% off your underwear, including my underwear. That's sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice, MALICE, for 20% off. You guys ever feel like you're being followed around the internet? Maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you. So our sponsor, Ipvanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help you become anonymous on the internet. Ipvanish is a virtual private network, a VPN for short, which is an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use a VPN on your computer, tablet, phone, whatever it is when you're streaming media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted. What you're watching, what you're searching, what you're reading. I know what you guys are doing, whatever it is that you're doing. That's important because what you're doing on the internet is no one's business but your own. For a listener of the show, Ipvanish is offering 65% off their annual plan, only $375 a month. Super easy to use. Turn on with one click. It runs in the background, helps to protect you while you're browsing the web. Go to ipvanish.com/malice and use promo code Malice. That's MALICE to get your 65% off savings. Their annual plan is just $44.99 for the first year with our discount. This is the time to sign up because with our discount and their current promotion, you can get a VPN for 65% off the usual offering. Here's the thing. Ipvanish is the best of the best. 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot with over 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and start protecting yourself online. Let's get back to the show.
Putin not only, the Russians conquered Chechnya. Okay, Chechnya. Do you know anything about Chechens? Have you ever met a Chechen? Are you familiar with the Chechen national character? Is there an insurgency in Chechnya? No, there is not. So basically, the Ukrainians next to Chechens are like basically like a golden retriever, next to like a starving rabid gray wolf, right? So there's that. You have a certain number of like the whole thing is just ridiculous. Like you can't have an insurgency in the middle of Europe. It's retarded. And basically, and so I'm reading this article in the Post. And they sort of acknowledge this. They're like, and now, we estimate that the insurgency might hold out for months or even years. So it's not like you're just going to lose a conventional war. Oh no, actually, the suffering that the Ukrainians are scheduled to go through, thanks to all the motherfuckers with Ukrainian flags in their Twitter profiles, is that they will first lose. And this is what everyone expects. Moreover, all reasonable people expected that expanding NATO would promote this. It's like the whole thing is just railed. It's like watching this like locomotive like drive straight up the ass of like 40 million people. And the Arab Spring was just like this, right? And you're basically watching this being done with all these fuckers with Ukrainian flags in their like, and they don't care at all. And you sort of bring this up to them and you're like, well, and they're like, well, they want to do it. They want to roll the dice on like losing a conventional war and then losing an insurgency and like being in the, I was about to say the position of the South in 1866, but actually there was a lot of praise at the time of the Confederate leadership and specifically of Lee for not starting a fucking guerrilla war in the South, which is what everyone expected him to do. And he's like, no, actually, motherfuckers, we are not going there. We are done. There's going to be no fucking bushwhacking. Everyone who's doing that now is going to fucking surrender. We wish we'd won. We lost. It is over and done. Okay, that wisdom is no longer present in America. They're just like, they want to basically fight Putin to the last Ukrainian, right? And they're basically just like using these people as like, pawns, right? And it's like one of the things in my latest post at graymirror.substack.com, that is Gray with NA, the American way. One of the anecdotes that I reference is there's a couple of like English like society toffs, high in power circles standing around, and in 1945, and they're watching this like grand society ball, and it's like a wedding, and everyone's really happy, and one of them says to the other, "Well, this is what we fight for. This is what we fought for, after all." And the other, who's I believe Lady Kennard, is like, "What? Are they all Poles?" And they weren't Poles, and you might notice that they weren't Jews either. You've probably grappled with this question yourself, Michael. World War II, good for the Jews, right? And so, World War Ukraine is probably not going to be good for the Ukrainians, but in some sense, it's like justified by the suffering of the Ukrainians, even though it seems that U.S. foreign policy has done everything it can do to cause the suffering of the Ukrainians, as if it was actual goal was to cause the Ukrainians to suffer. It would not have done anything different, and it would not be doing anything different. And my feeling is that I feel that this is fucked, Michael. I feel that it's fucked. And so that is basically my overview of the Ukrainian scene. I could add one more note, which is on the war footage.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, and I start actually the piece off at this point, which is that basically this is war. This is like, you think you're standing up for freedom and rights and whatever, but really what you're doing is you basically caught a couple of lobsters down, in the water, and you're watching them fight. And you're watching this, like, you're actually, in a sense, sort of getting your rocks off of on power and on conflict. And, some of us who are like, and you can push that a little farther and be the kind of person who just gets the rocks off on watching what some have called a war porn. Yeah. I don't know. Are you a consumer of war porn, Michael?
Most certainly not.
Yeah. You don't beat yourself. That doesn't make you. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Different things are for different people. But sure. In any case, people are like, just like raving about the quality of this war porn.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is wrong. This is terrible. And I think it says a lot about the conflict, actually. And, people always say that because the camera is always getting better. And I'm just like, okay, you've just not spent any serious amount of time with war porn. And I want to give you like one story about that, because the best war porn has come overwhelmingly out of Syria. because in Syria, a lot of these forces that are fighting are irregular, and because they're irregular, they're like startups. They think very quickly and they do interesting, innovative things. And one of the things I say, again, in my latest post at graymirror.substack.com, subscribe, very inexpensive, that is like, how does Putin expect to win a media war when his tanks are not even taking video, right? I mean, and basically they're not making that mistake in Syria. Like every tank has like a GoPro on it, right? And so basically, if you're a fan, if you want to involve yourself emotionally in this, imagine you have one side that you can just get right into the fighting. You can like follow a specific tank, maybe they have feeds, you're like a fan of whatever, like you can really feel the personal nature of this conflict when you have those POV shots and you're actually on a fucking tank and you're like looking down the barrel and like the building like blows up in the distance. There's this huge boom, right? You know, the tanks, right? And it's brilliant. And it's amazing. There's nothing like that I've seen. And, I do a lot of other things besides checking war porn, but obviously some interest there. And it's like, I guess people are talking about like gore. Maybe there's like good gore. I don't do gore at all. And, this stuff is disgusting. But like, let me tell you just about the hottest piece of war porn that I ever saw out of the Syrian war. Now, there was this weird Russian agency called ANNA, which means the Abkhaz National News Agency, which would be very funny to readers of Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. And it has a little Abkhazian thing. And they were sort of Russia and government aligned or whatever, did amazing work. And one time I'm looking on YouTube for videos to show to my son, who's a preschooler at the time, so he doesn't really, like he's just seeing things moving around on the screen, right? And he doesn't really understand like the geopolitics or like any of the human rights issues, right? And I see this incredible ANNA clip, and what they've done is they have a T-72, mounted on I have a GoPro on a T-72, and it's going around, it's doing its thing, and then this you in the person of this tank are taken out from behind by a jihadi with an RPG. You actually get blown up, you're actually destroyed. And then ANNA does something that is extremely amazing that I've never seen done before, since they actually cut to the POV of the same guy who just blew you up.
Oh, wow.
They've got the video from both sides and they weave it into a single narrative. How often has that been done in war?
No, I've never seen that.
Never. I mean, and that's just like incredibly like, I mean, I just wanted to give them an Oscar right then and there. I mean, that is just incredibly based journalism. So, basically, hey, Russians, Ukrainians, whatever you're calling yourself these days, if you have like, you can do that. Like, I mean, the best thing that I've seen is it's like Russians and Ukrainians yelling insults at each other over radios. It's because they both speak Russian, because Ukraine is actually a part of Russia. But that's my Ukraine war in the Ukraine summary. I prefer to think of it as a Russian civil war. It's basically part of America's pattern of starting civil wars in other countries and kind of cackling over the bloodshed. And, this is our second intervention in a Russian civil war, which I'm sure the Russians remember, even if we don't. And I just hope the war ends as soon as possible and as few as possible people are hurt. And I hope that basically President Putin realizes the world historic opportunity that has been granted to him.
Curtis, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Has it been an interview? I thought it was more really of a rant. I think my favorite part of the interview was when did we talk about, never mind, I won't get into your personal life, but yes, I won't. I said I wouldn't, and I won't. That would have been my favorite part had we gone there. But we didn't go there. What was my favorite part? I think my favorite part was telling the story of the Syrian war porn that I just saw, because basically like the cynicism of that perspective is so refreshing. after like the nauseating hypocrisy of like the fucking Ukraine is George Floyd, perspective. And there's this great clip by Kamala Harris. Have you seen this one? Vice President Harris goes on. She's explaining the war in Ukraine, and she's on an African American, a community radio station, as one might say. And so someone asks her to explain the Ukraine thing, and she literally does an Eli 5. Right. And so she literally sort of does this, explains it in like kindergarten terms, but like exactly as you would if you were talking to a kindergarten class, but on a community, in the same tone as well, but to a community radio station, which not for children, right? Which I think was amazing. And her sort of narrative of that was so beautiful and simplistic. It immediately brought back like World War I propaganda, like very, very like the Hun, who's like a gorilla in a spiked helmet is carrying away your sister. You was killed at the Hun, right? And it's like sort of this like programming at this like incredibly base biological level. You're just like, wow, they were really just like, these are not the droids you're looking for. And America was like, we're not looking for droids like these, right? And I mean, I just like, I don't know. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see this kind of propaganda environment, this information environment. I'm sad that people in Ukraine are dying, but we're learning but we're learning a lot. And we're seeing history being made. History is opening up. And there's a possibility that this will lead to more multipolarity in the world, which I think would be a great thing for human history.
You are welcome.
Watch Yellowstone for free on Pluto TV. All this weekend, Pluto TV is streaming a marathon of seasons 1 to 3 of Yellowstone, the show The Wrap calls a smash hit series. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Mission Impossible 3, Gladiator, CSI, and more. Absolutely free. So download the free Pluto TV streaming app and watch Yellowstone seasons 1 to 3 free.